to Art in the Raw, Conversations with Creative People. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to my friend, Taura Rivera. She works in the film industry as a set designer, and I know she has a lot of interesting stories. If this is your first time watching, I'm your host, Ann Kelly. Now, you might be wondering who I am. That's fair. In a nutshell, I'm someone that's been fascinated with art, music, anything creative most of my life. About 20 years ago, I made the decision to move to Santa Fe, New Mexico to further immerse myself in the art scene and to attend art school. I've now been working in the professional gallery world for about 15 years now, and I started Art in the Raw about halfway through 2020 to keep people inspired, including myself. So thanks so much for watching today. And should you want to know more about me, check out the description below. There's a link to a few interviews I did, including one that's on Art in the Raw. But in the meantime, I'm excited to introduce you to Taura. Welcome, Taura.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. Where are you this evening?
Right now, I am at my home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in my office.
New Mexico is kind of home base, but you've lived a lot of places over the past 10 years or so. Is that
accurate? I mean, I've lived a lot of places over the past course of my life, but I'm actually originally from New Mexico. I was born here in New Mexico, in Pecos. My mother, she was a hippie, so I was born in like this small cabin in Pecos. After I was born, actually less than 6 months before I was born, we moved to New York, and I lived in New York for a short amount of time, and then we moved to Florida for most of my life. I grew up there basically. When I was 19, I came to New Mexico, but we lived half the year in Florida, half the year in Mexico, because my father's from Mexico. So we would go to Mexico and live there half the year and half the year in Florida. And then when I graduated from high school, I came back to New Mexico to do the architecture program at UNM. From there, I've moved on and come back and, many different moves, but right now, Albuquerque is my home base, at least for the next couple weeks.
Right. And you've been working in the film industry recently. Had some of your travels related to that, or not travels, but places that you've called home?
Well, yes, I do travel for work a lot. I've been in the film industry for about 6 years now, doing primarily set design, and that's working in the art department. And then, but I have worked mostly in New Mexico, but I've gone to Virginia for 6 months. I've worked in North Carolina, but most of my work's been here. My next show will be in LA, which I'm already working on, but remotely right now. And then I'll be working in LA starting April 5th. But here is home base, Albuquerque.
So you went to UNM for architecture.
Yeah, and then I graduated in 2006.
How did the film industry come into the picture?
Oh, and it's very interesting because I mean, working in architecture, I worked at architecture firms for about 11 years, and doing different things. I did pretty much everything except for take the exam to get licensed. I even did the study to do the exam to get licensed as a licensed architect. You have to be licensed in every state that you want to work in, if you want to put your stamp and so forth. So I did all the things, I had all of the the educational credits and all of the different prerequisites that's required, but I never took the exam. I ended up moving to New York right when I got to that point. I mean, the real reason was because I was going to take care of my great aunt who wasn't doing too well. She had moved into a nursing home, and her apartment was just empty. And I had always wanted to move to New York, as an adult, to live by myself. So I went out there to help take care of her and just sort of see if I could make it in New York. And I worked for a few real estate brokers and did a lot of architectural design for them and services, not quite, architectural offices where you're doing buildings and so forth, but mostly real estate type things. And that I was doing that for a while. I was also working at Barney's because when I worked at Barney's, that's where I made my paycheck. But then I was doing the real estate things, just to make it in New York because it's tough. When I was in New York, it wasn't too long before I ended up. It was only about 4 months before I ended up coming back to New Mexico. My sister Nani, she actually had called me and said, "Hey, listen, my boss is coming out to New York. He's got this, he's got this meeting with IATSE and they're gonna, do this. You should talk to him because, New Mexico needs good set designers and it's right up your alley." And I was like, no, 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 because she had tried to talk me into it before I even moved to New York when I was working at architecture firm. She's like, "Come join the film industry. It's great and you'll love it. It's right up your alley." I was like, no, I don't do fake. I do real. And so it's this kind of snobby-ish sense that architects get sometimes. And so I was like, no, forever. But she's like, "Hey, listen, he's coming out there. Just talk to him." I was like, okay. So I met with her boss and he ended up telling me, the things. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. And so I came out to New Mexico and I tried it. And then within 2 months, I ended up set designing on my first show was Better Call Saul. I knew one of the other set designers who was an architect that I greatly respect, and my sister had worked with and introduced me to. And he's just actually one of my favorite people to work with. And he had told me, he's like, "Hey, I know you wanted to get into set design," brought me on, and that's how I ended up doing it. I was kind of lured in. I'm like, let me give it a shot. And eventually I was like, okay, this is actually really great. And it is real architecture because you really do have to think about real design. It's not all fake. You have to think about structural things. You have to think about, the materiality, how it's going to be built. So it's real things that are getting built. It's just not permanent. It's more temporary.
Right. So it's all design related.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, absolutely. And I actually have a lot more fun doing set design than I ever did doing architecture. Because in architecture, you're following codes and you're sticking to this and that. But like in set design, you could do something that's completely out of this world. You just have to make it look cool and make sure that it'll hold up this way. And if it doesn't, they'll VFX it. So it can be digital.
That's really cool. There's this photographer, David Chatremus, who builds these composite buildings out of, basically he takes different objects like old refrigerators and such, and he deconstructs them, photographs the individual elements, and then he'll composite like thousands of these elements together to build this architecture. Oh, wow. And he's not actually an architect, but his point was he loved working in that way because he didn't have to worry about the laws of physics. So you probably have to worry about the laws of physics to a certain extent, but
well, to a certain extent, that's actually where the set designer does come in, because you have to make it work, but really it's working closely with construction, because I can design anything, and it happens a lot. People design all these things, you don't know how it's going to come together, but then when your drawings go to construction, they're like, "What is this?" And so I do communicate a lot with construction, the people who are going to build it, because even if it is, defying the laws of physics, there's different ways of approaching it. So we're going to make it look this way, but that's not really going to happen. It's actually going to do this up until here, then we're going to cut to here, and this is where it's going to lead out, because that could never happen in real life, type of thing. Like, it's important to think about physics, especially, for me, but more importantly is also being in close communication with the people who are going to build it, because they know so much more than I'll ever know. The way these things are all built, if I were to, start building these things myself, sure, but I don't know how to build it. I know how to specify it, and I think I could figure it out if I had to, but definitely physics takes a play, but you can kind of step outside it a little bit as a designer, but you don't want to stray from it too much.
But that seems like the beauty part of the whole collaborative aspect of it, where you can just dream these ideas, and then perhaps these people say, well,
yeah.
this, but if we don't do this thing, it's gonna, I don't know, fall on somebody, or
Right. Yeah. Well, and safety is a huge thing. I mean, certain things too, even in set design, it is real architecture because oftentimes we'll have to hire civil engineers to be able to stamp things. Because, sometimes you're digging into earth that requires permits, that requires certain stamps. It depends really on what you're designing. You could be designing a whole landscape and, maybe it's a fire scene where you have trees that are made out of propane, and so you have to have certain permits and distancing. And it is a lot real world, a lot more than I originally ever thought it was. I always thought it was like, oh, it's fake, it's Hollywood, but it's not. A lot of it's very real. You have to get permits for a lot of the things if they're really big builds. Definitely.
Earlier today, I was browsing through Facebook, and I think I saw a friend had posted that they were bulldozing, I think, the facade of a patio of a restaurant for the new season of Better Call Saul. I guess maybe they had, I think it was Better Call Saul. If I read this properly, they had changed the patio between the last season and this season. So they were going to bulldoze it, film the episode, and then build it back how it was.
Maybe. I know a lot of the crew, but I'm not on it this season. I'm on other things. But that show, they do a lot here in Albuquerque. One thing that's great about it is that they really showcase Albuquerque. I didn't start watching it till I was living in New York, and then I ended up working on Saul. And I did season 1, season 2, not season 3, and then season 4. And I didn't do season 5. I was in Virginia when season 5 was going on.
Working on something else. But yeah, the film industry has really come up in New Mexico.
Last 10 years, it's kind of been like on this exponential growth. It's actually, it's been growing a lot. Even since I've been here, the amount of growth is really incredible just to see it happen.
And Netflix bought the studio.
Yeah, Netflix bought Albuquerque Studios, or Q Studios.
You definitely need that in New Mexico because there's kind of a lack of that type of industry. But it's
NBC now has studios here as well. I worked on a show. What was it? Well, it got when COVID happened, it got kind of canceled until further notice. But I had been working on, was it Evil Knievel? It was a show that they were going to do about Evil Knievel, but that was an NBC show, and it was like a mini series type thing, a short series. But yeah, NBC Studios is bringing a lot of things in as well, and they're decent studios. It's a warehouse that's been converted to a sound station, but it's actually pretty decent, and the offices are really well done.
Looking into the future, do you see yourself spending more time in New Mexico for work reasons?
Absolutely. I love working in New Mexico, and I know all the crew here, so it's really great working here. Wherever I go to work, you always meet people. You're always going to make friends. Well, at least I try to. if I'm not that annoying person, but I try to be like more social and meet people and try to get to know crew. But yeah, definitely, I want to work again in New Mexico for sure. I'm going to LA. It's kind of like the new transition. I just made I'm a 480, which is the local union here in New Mexico. But just very recently, and why I'm going to LA to work on this show is because I just finally made my 800 local, which is the LA local, which has jurisdiction everywhere, including New Mexico. So I definitely want to come back here. But this one also allows me to go to, say, wherever 800 has jurisdiction. Typically, if they're going to pull from a pool to travel, it'll be from there. And I love traveling. That's like one of my favorite things. So if I have to travel for work, I'll find time on my time in between when I'm not working to get to know the area. I love meeting new people, seeing new places. It's probably one of my favorite things in life.
Oh, definitely. And when that can become part of your job, that's amazing. In terms of all the shows you've worked on so far, is there a favorite you have for any reason?
Oh my gosh.
Even just being a fan of the show, or maybe the cast was great, or.
Well, as far as like being a fan of the show, I really liked working on Stranger Things, but it was the show that I was working on when the pandemic happened. So there's kind of like, there's that. But so you didn't quite get the full experience of working on a show, getting to know the crew to the full extent, going through all the episodes. Like, it wasn't that experience. So it was much different. Well, I loved working on Walking Dead World Beyond. That was the one I did in Virginia. And that one was just really cool because it was my first time working on location. I think my favorite feature film that I've worked on hasn't come out yet, but it will be coming out, I think this like late spring, maybe early summer, but it was Those Who Wish Me Dead. And it's an Angelina Jolie movie. It's really cool. I don't know what I'm allowed to say without breaking my non-disclosure agreement, but I really did a lot of really cool things on those sets that were really fun. And it was just like, I learned new things. That was the first time I had ever done a drone survey. And a drone can actually capture photo imagery of like 3D photogeometric imagery that can actually create topography. We had to survey topography. So basically we had to do some things that we had to alter the topography of the land, and we had to make something that would work with what we were trying to do. And so whenever we were surveying, there's these things that I can't remember the name of them. I can never remember what they are, but they're like these long poles. There's a remote control and you stick it in the ground and it kind of measures, you measure 0.0 and then you'll move it here and you'll do another point and then it'll be like, oh, +2 feet. And then you'll do another point, it'll be +3. And it's kind of how you do like fully correct topography if you want to have it 3D geometrically, known. So usually we do that, but one of my friends who I had worked with previously said he had a drone. He's like, I can do photogeometry, and he had done it on a previous show I'd worked on, but I'd never really worked with him directly when he had done it for them. And so I called him and he came out and he brought his drone and, he put it down and he set a flight path on the drone. And in like 3 minutes, the drone flew around and then it was back. And then you get this card and it gives you like an OBX file, which for those who don't know, it's basically a 3D file that you can import into a bunch of different programs, whether it be Revit or AutoCAD or Rhino or whatever 3D program you work in, you can import this. And it was incredible. It even like outlined certain little bushes, so it wasn't just like the land. It was like you could see the tree, and it also has photogeometry. What I ended up doing to map it all out was use 3ds. There's not 3ds Max. There's BIM 360. So it's got a bunch of different things. And then there's like, you can use another point cloud system, and it sets point clouds that you then tie into your model, which I'm probably going way into too much detail for this. But it was really cool how the drone captured all of this data, and then you could plug it into your program. And then I had it in Revit, and that's where I was altering it. I could do section cuts. I literally just had to cut through the area that I wanted, and it would show me the whole topography. So, okay, I want to build something that's going to do this. And I knew the topography. It was really cool. It was probably one of the coolest new things I've learned.
I suspect we'll probably see more of that technology, or I mean, maybe as the consumer, I don't see it. But as someone working in the industry, you'll see more of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, the architectural field is using it so much better. I'm trying to get the film industry to be more like this, like even working in Revit and having all these different things. The film industry doesn't always use these. You don't need it as much, but it's definitely a very, very valuable tool. And so like the more people are aware of it, the more they'll do. Typically, you'll see a lot of people just using AutoCAD or SketchUp or what's the other one? Rhino. I mean, they're all great programs. They all do different things. But the beautiful thing about like using the whole like BIM 360, and BIM means building information modeling. So it kind of gives the information all around in like 360 degrees. And it's very efficient if everybody knows how to do it. I do it, but it doesn't work as well if you don't have other people you're working with to collaborate to be able to work with you in it.
So this kind of makes me think of this topic that comes up no matter what we're talking about, which is the whole analog versus digital thing. So in terms of architecture and set design and film, I suspect there are still a lot of people working, or maybe not, people working in the industry that are considered kind of analog folks. So
Well,
is that true? And if so, what kind of how would they be working that's different? Are they
well,
sketching everything from scratch, or
it's different. You know, there's different values to different things. The thing with the film industry is, I mean, the more we get into it, the more, you know, time is of the essence, and you're behind when you start, type of thing. You know, they always want it 5 minutes before they tell you they want it, type of thing. So you're always like stuck with time. The thing with design, and as far as that analog versus digital type thing would be, and for what I do, would be hand drafting versus, you know, the digital drafting. And then there's also even digital drafting that's kind of like just a digital pen, you know, versus a program that's, you know, like Revit that I work on, that's on steroids, but there's all these different parametric things you have to think about. They're not all necessary for every job. I don't think that they're antiquated, because honestly, sometimes, especially in like the film industry, and sometimes you really want a really beautifully hand-drawn drawing. When you hand draw something, it really makes you think about it a lot more, because you're doing it by hand. When I did architecture school, I had to draw by hand. We weren't even allowed to use AutoCAD at the time. So I didn't even learn to use AutoCAD in architecture school. I learned it later when I was at a firm. They really want you to think about how you're thinking about it. When you have to do it all by hand, it really helps. And it's the same with modeling something. When you model it physically, you can physically hold it in your hand and see how it works. With our industry, it is becoming less and less, but there are still, you know, shows that want that hand-drawn drawing. I mean, they're beautiful. You can't draw something by hand. Like, you can't make the drawings. I can print them out and they're sharp and they're crisp lines and the line weights are all perfect, but it doesn't, there's a different beauty. And I think it's more of like an aesthetic thing. It's not the most efficient time-wise, but it might be the most efficient design-wise, only because you really think about the design. So for example, when I worked in an architecture firm, the architect I worked for drew everything by hand, and then he'd give me his drawings and I would digitize them. But he really thought about the design and how it was working out, because it's kind of just the way he thought. Things are moving forward. They're going to be far and few between, but they will still be needed, I think. I mean, there's just something beautiful about those things. And honestly, there are certain art directors and production designers that would rather somebody who drafts by hand than somebody who drafts digitally. The only thing is that as long as they have it in their budget for that timeline is the thing, because sometimes you just need it quick. And you know, sometimes I'm being told print where you are, because they're like, wherever it is, it's going out right here. And I'm like, but it's not finished and perfect yet. It's never going to be perfect. But they'll be like, it doesn't matter, print it where it is, and we're getting it out because they need to build this. And I'm like, oh shoot, I gotta hurry up. And so then that's what you just have to do. But if you have the time and you have the budget to really think about these things, it's a very, very rare luxury to have time to really think about the design, because typically you're thinking about the budget and the time is never there. So it really just depends.
I would suspect maybe there are certain directors or producers or maybe that just are looking for that type of thing. But
I wouldn't say so much the directors and producers. It would be more the production designer that needs that. If it's the director and a producer, it's because it's something that's going to be on camera. So oftentimes, you know, they'll come to the art department and say, hey, we have this prop. It would be a prop because it's something that somebody handles. We need a drawing of this that they're going to look at and mark on. And so we'll do it, but it's something on camera, and they might want a specific look, because if it's a period piece, it has to be a hand-drawn thing where you definitely need somebody who knows how to draft by hand. And not everybody who drafts digitally can draft by hand. They really can't. It's a craftsmanship technique. I know it a little bit, but I'm much better digitally than I am by hand. I can do it, but it's not going to look like someone who's more, you know, more experience and has been doing it forever type of thing.
Well, and I might maybe compare that to the world of commercial photography. I can't imagine there's that many commercial photographers that are being sent out with the assignment of go shoot this assignment with film. It's
Right.
usually more go shoot this thing and upload it from the site yesterday, that type of thing. So, but that's really interesting. I think it was a commercial photographer I know that photographed a lot of animals in LA that this sounds so weird, but animals that lived in LA for the film industry.
Oh,
and a lot of them were out of work, the animals, because it used to be if the chimpanzee, for example, was in the film, like he was in the whole film, but then it kind of shifted to where they would just shoot maybe a scene with him and digitize him, and then the rest of the film was
that's interesting, because I haven't thought about animals being put out of work. I've worked on shows where we've had a lot of animals. I mean, I worked on a show, we had a giraffe, we had a tiger, we had ants. Like literally, you have to have a wrangler for every type of creature that you have. It's interesting. So I remember looking at like the call sheet and seeing ant wranglers call time is 8 a.m. I'm like, an ant wrangler? But it was because they had to have like ants on like a plate of old food that was in the hallway of a hotel. Anyway, it was interesting. But yeah, I never thought about the animals being out of work. That's an interesting thought.
I kind of want to just become an ant wrangler temporarily so I can put that on my resume. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Right. And then I've worked with scorpion wranglers too, because like say you want like this desert road and like a scorpion runs across, and so they have to have like a wrangler who's gonna like tickle it to make sure it goes in the direction or whatever. I mean, that's just like one example. Dog wranglers are very common because you have dogs, and every cat wranglers. If it's an animal, there's a wrangler for it, and it's pretty interesting.
I'm considering a new side hustle. I might want to start wrangling for the film industry. I don't know. There's so many different creative positions within it.
Yeah. Well, that's what's cool about the film industry is there's a position for everything. I mean, if you're into numbers and accounting, there's that. If you're into design, there's that. If you're into food, there's that. I mean, there's pretty much an industry. There's something for each industry in the film industry.
That's cool. That's really cool.
It's very
and then in terms of Netflix, it seems like that's been changing film a lot, where especially maybe in this year where a lot of series or movies might just go immediately to Netflix.
Right. Everything's streaming, or even like Wonder Woman going straight to HBO, or Mulan going straight to Disney Plus. Like it was interesting. I was happy to pay it, but you think about all the producers who are like, we're not making that box office money, but at the same time, they might be making better. I haven't looked at numbers. Everybody wants to go digital. People have home theaters. In the summer, I bought a screen and a projector. I was just like in my backyard watching movies from my backyard at night. I mean, I had like a little above ground pool. I think if they start marketing it right, you could probably get more money charging for the free for the streaming part. I paid for Mulan early. I paid for not Wonder Woman, but I did pay for her after she was no longer available. Even after I had already seen it, it's definitely a shift, but that's where everything's kind of going. It's kind of inevitable, I feel like,
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, the comfort
like if you're willing to pay the price and you don't want to go to a movie theater, and now everyone has a reason, because now you're worried about getting a disease. You're worried about getting a virus that's global.
Well, and now that you can watch a new film from your pool or hot tub or something like that,
right?
Why do you even want to
I do like going to the movie theater. No. There's still a certain energy about it. I do love going to the movie theater, but I definitely think it's not everybody. Like, I mean, I like going to a movie theater if there's not like, it's not crowded. I can sit where I want to sit. It's one of those theaters that has the recliners that you can like lay down on. I mean, it's all about comfort, but I do like going to a movie theater.
I was talking to a friend earlier who's in the theater, and I was asking about set design. She was saying if you have to be as specific because it's not on film and people are viewing it from the audience, whereas if you're doing set design for the movies, it has to be way more specific.
I've always been really interested in theater design. It's something I've never done other than maybe helping paint something when I was a kid for a play that I did, other than that. But I've known a lot of people that come from a theater background, and it's different. It's you think more, you really only think one perspective. And whereas for a film, even if it's a single camera type thing, it moves in different angles. You can do 360 degrees of a view. Sometimes, I mean, with set design, for film, there could be so many scenarios. You might have to build the same thing twice in two different ways, so that one way it's structural and that the other way somebody could be thrown through it, type of thing. With theater, you only have one take. And so like with film, you have as many takes as you need. Sometimes, like if it's something that's going to break, they'll be like, okay, make 3 of this chair because it's going to be broken over somebody's head. And if they don't break it right the first time, we're going to have to do a second take, but we're only making 3. So you've only got 3 takes. And that's what they tell the actors. They're like, okay, you got 3 takes for this type of thing. So yeah, it's definitely very different. I would love to do theater. I think it would be really fun, but it's also a specialty. It's not my background, because my background's more architectural. I do a lot more real life type design in what I do. I love doing like period pieces, or going to the 70s or the 40s or something, a very specific time, and you have to design specific and think about realistically how it happens. And actually, as somebody who has an architectural background, it gets me into trouble sometimes because I think of things a little too practical, as far as like how it's going to function, how it's going to work. It needs to be like this. And then whereas film people tend to think, if they have like a film educational background versus an architect background, where you have to think about codes and this and structure and all these different exams we had to take back then. And they're like, no, well, that doesn't matter because it's not like they're really going to do it. You can just make it go like that. I'm like, yeah, but it wouldn't really ever do that. And they're like, yeah, just do it. So sometimes like that hurts me sometimes. Like, I'm like, oh, it shouldn't be like that. But I get caught in my head because I want it to be practical. The thing with theater versus the set design is it's just one take, one perspective. You don't have to think about it practically. Oh, this wall is going to fly this way. This wall is going to fly this way. This curtain goes up. This one comes down. It's much different. It's more like layers, actually, if you think about it, versus being 3D. Theater would be more like, if you know Photoshop or anything that has layers, it's more like layers. This layer on, this layer off, this layer on, this layer off. I've never done it. I've never done theater design, but I think I've always been fascinated by it because it would be really fun to, I don't know, take a shot at it,
And not to say that's necessarily analog versus digital, but maybe to a certain extent.
Oh, well, definitely. Theater's one of the most it's the original scene, really. Now we can have all kinds of scene, but theater's the original scene. That's your screen right there is the theater. But it'll never be, and that's a good point, because it'll never be obsolete. People love that. And it's the same with, clocks. People still love their regular wristwatches versus their Apple Watch.
Right. You could have one or the other, but yeah, they're different.
Or both, depending on the day.
Right. Maybe one on each wrist.
I always get made fun of because I'll be like, oh, what time is it? And I go like this. I never wear a watch, ever. But I still do that. Like, I don't know. It's just like.
Right. Because you used to, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, like when I was much younger, but I don't think I've worn one in like 20 years, probably. Maybe
Right.
15 years. I don't wear watches anymore. Not since the cell phone came out. And then I stopped wearing watches.
But there's that memory of it to the point where you're looking at your wrist expecting
There's still the memory of it. That's
time. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So you were talking about period pieces a little bit, and something I've seen in, well, or something you hear about in film a little bit over the years is when, I wouldn't say it's necessarily set designers, maybe costume designers, somebody on the set makes an error where maybe the film is set in 1810, but there's a character wearing a digital watch or something like.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's not just costumes.
I mean, it's got to come up in set too, right? Like
oh, absolutely, all the time. Yeah. Now you have to do your research. I mean, if you're working with a good designer, and honestly, I've been very lucky to work with really great designers. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm like, are you serious? You're doing that? It's like when it comes to something like that, because sometimes people will be like, oh, that's fine. But when it comes to like a time period, you have to be very vigilant, and especially if it's episodic, you also have to think about continuity and making sure that that same thing is in the same spot. Definitely, like even if you think about a doorknob, all of the older doorknobs, they're always going to be knobs. That's why they're called doorknobs. But nowadays, it's like you have the ADAs, and it's like you got the handle. It's a door handle, and you push it down because if in case you can't grip it, you just need an elbow. You can open that door, and that's an ADA thing. But that's like one example. You wouldn't see a door like that in a 1950s or 30s or pre ADA basically.
Right. So is there somebody that is in charge of reviewing that type of information, or?
I mean, there's a lot of people in charge of that. Primarily, when it comes to at least the design, it's going to be the art director and the production designer. The production designer is the designer who designs the whole look. He talks with the set decorators, the set designers, which is what I do, the art directors, the props people. I mean, they kind of design the whole look of it. And then the art director makes sure that that look is fulfilled throughout the things. And if it's something specific like a timepiece, that would kind of fall on the art director. And then my boss is always the art director and the production designer, and they, the art director is kind of the project manager. So for the things that we do, I guess it would fall on the art director, but essentially it all falls on the top, so the production designer.
Right. So if you accidentally slip on a door handle or something like that, and it makes it to the final production.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I have time to do hardware, which I oftentimes don't, I can be like, okay, look for something like this. I won't specify it exactly. That'll usually be like an assistant art director will find the hardware, or I mean, I have done it frequently. It depends on the show and the size of the show, but yeah, definitely it would be like an art director that would be the one that would probably take the fall. I think. Luckily, we haven't had that kind of a thing happen.
But you hear about that, and it's always kind of that funny thing. Or for example, and I won't mention specific movies, but my boyfriend's a mechanic, and we saw a movie about a year and a half ago that was mostly filmed in garages, and he was pointing out little things like, oh, none of this technology existed in this time period. And I would assume probably the general population doesn't actually realize that because they're not mechanics.
I am that person all the time when I'm watching a movie. I'm like, no, they didn't do their homework. That's not supposed to be there. Like, and especially like if it's something that I know a lot about, I'm like, nope, definitely not. And so when you're designing for these things, hopefully you do all the research, but even when it comes to translating a language onto a sign that's going to be in the background, if it's somebody who's looking up Google Translate, it's not always going to come out the way it should sound.
Right.
But no, mistakes are made in every show. You just hope that people don't catch them.
Right. And it's those specific people that are even looking for that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I look for the things in the background. I'm always trying to see, like as a set designer, I'm like, oh, that's definitely a location. That's definitely a set, like on a stage. Like I try to differentiate, what's real and what's not real, or what's a location or a set. And I'm always looking in the background. I love looking at the way other people. That's how you learn. Is just by seeing what other people do.
So if there was any set you could build, like they were just like, do whatever you want, is there a specific type of set you would want to
Oh my
create?
gosh, yes. My dream job, I think, is to work, and don't laugh. I would just want to work on a live action Disney movie. Like I like a classic that's being made live action. Like, oh my gosh, if I could have worked on Beauty and the Beast, that would have been the dream. But I mean, or Aladdin, or any of the live actions. Like, it's one of my favorite things. One of my favorite types of movies is to watch live actions of classics that I was in love with when I was a kid, and seeing how they come to life, and like the technology that we have these days. So that's kind of what, because Disney movies have, I don't know, they have some sort of magic about them that if you can create it, I think that's really exciting, just the magic of it. And it doesn't even have to be Disney. It could be, any of them, any of the, like a live action type cartoon that's a classic.
Well, all that comes from our childhood, and I'd never
Sure.
actually been to Disney. I'd never been to Disneyland actually up until a few months before the pandemic. Randomly decided to go
Okay.
then, and
I've
didn't
never been.
actually realize how. Yeah, no, it ended up happening, and it was. I can't believe how amazing the timing was, and it was really a lot more magical than I expected. Just any of it. So I
Yeah.
could definitely see that for sure.
Yeah, I've never been to Disneyland, but I grew up going, I grew up a Disney girl. We would go to Disney World like once or twice a year, because I had mentioned earlier I lived in Florida and in Mexico like half the year, but we would drive from Florida to Mexico. And so on the way up, we'd stop at Disney World and we'd do that whole Epcot, Magic Kingdom, whatever it was that we were doing. And then we'd drive on to Mexico, and then we'd typically do it on the way back. But this one was, so that's kind of like one of the things, but I've never been to Disneyland. So now that I'm moving to LA, I'll have to pay a visit.
Well, yeah, when things open up a little bit more, I kind of want to go back, and so maybe
You
we
have to
should
come
all go.
visit, come stay with me.
Yeah, I'll come stay with you, and we'll go to Disney, and it'll be
There we
awesome.
go. Sounds like a plan.
In addition to working as a set designer, you've also been involved in the film festival along with some other family members for a minute here. You're a board member, and
I am. Well, actually, when my sister had told me to come to New Mexico, she had brought me out here. And before I started doing set design, she had me volunteering with her at the film festival. And so I was just helping her, and we ended up pulling off a whole film festival. And then shortly after that was when I started working in the film industry. But it was kind of like my crash course of like learning the film industry and getting to know things. And it's become something that's actually really fun. I started, I guess, in 2014 was when I started volunteering, and then maybe it was 15 I became a board member. And then every year I'm as involved as I possibly can. If I'm working, I tend to not be as involved, but it's definitely a family affair. My sister Nani is the one who runs it. She's the chair and the director. I mean, she wears pretty much every hat when it comes to the film festival, and I help her wherever I can. But it's so fun because you get to meet like the independent world, which I've never had the opportunity to work on an independent film. I've really only worked on, bigger shows, other than you know, my introduction with that is the film festival, but then you get to watch these movies and see, you know, there are some really incredible independent artists that make shows just as good of quality as, you know, these major features that have huge budgets, and they work with what they can. And then the stories they have to tell are so much more personal too, you know, watching the film festival stories. During the festival, it's always, I think maybe I've watched half a movie or 3/4 of a movie during the festival, because whenever I would go in to watch a movie, I'd end up having to leave to go take care of something or prepare for something else. And so I never watch films during the festival. I usually just do help with events and, you know, go to different things. But I'll get to watch them screening because, you know, whether it's on Without a Box or Film Freeway or whatever. I think they're consolidating now. There's just one, but I really enjoy doing the film festival, and it was actually my first introduction, even before I started doing set design. So my sister really is the one who introduced me to the film industry, and she went to school for it at the College of Santa Fe. She did the moving image arts program at College of Santa Fe, and yeah, she's kind of my introduction to it all. And she still does the festival. This year was interesting. It was all digital, and we did everything through this this partner of ours, Zerb TV. They actually it's basically an online streaming, and what they do is they have different independent films from different film festivals. So film festivals that have already, you know, aired these things, they get in touch with the filmmakers, and they have this whole streaming database. I mean, if you ever want to check out, it's not very expensive to join, but it's Zerb TV. It's spelled XERB, and they were the platform for all of our filming this year. So it was streaming this year, and there were no events where you had to, you know, go watch a movie in a theater because it's been COVID. So we did everything digitally. Everything was aired on Zerb TV. It actually was a really good turnout. It was interesting to see. They went the festival went viral this year, which was really cool.
That's really cool. I'd wondered.
It was actually, I think it was easier to handle, primarily because it was all digital. You know, during a festival, it's like, oh, the video's not working here, you gotta go run over. And like, you know, like I said, I rarely watch movies because sometimes I have to go put a fire out because something could be going down, but you have to go out all these places. But everybody was in the office. Nobody had to go anywhere. Everything was digital. It was manageable. You don't get that, you know, camaraderie of like, you know, socializing with people and having that energy. But it'll be back soon. But it was nice that we were still able to keep it and, you know, at least continue another festival online.
That's something I've been thinking about. Is I kind of feel like maybe it would be helpful when things normalize, in lieu of the way we used to do things, adding the digital thing as well, because that makes it a little more just open to more people, whereas not everybody can come to Santa Fe for the film festival. But a lot of people are going to prefer to do that. But people in all parts of the world can buy digital tickets. So I feel like maybe
exactly. Everything. It opens up a new market, a much larger market. Actually, a couple of years ago, not this year, but back in 2020, when we did the festival, we had our whole award ceremony streamed online, and we were already kind of moving towards that. And so this year, just kind of like, all right, let's get what we've already, and the year before that with Zerb TV, we had already started establishing, like we were the first festival with them to start contacting our filmmakers and asking them for clearance. Certain things, you know, they're under contract or, you know, different distribution contracts. They couldn't all join on. So, but we had already started this digital platform. And so when it kind of hit us, we were already a little ahead of the game. I mean, not by much, nobody expected this, but we were already starting to think in the digital realm. I mean, as everybody is now. So this year we really had to tap into it.
Oh, yeah. So it'll be interesting to see next year how that all plays out. So there's a few questions I like to ask all the guests on the show. Is there anything you collect?
I have a lot of collections. For the basic souvenirs for all the countries I go to, I usually get a keychain for sure and other things. I definitely get a magnet and I get a shot glass. But I also collect knives, not just like a regular knife, but like fancy knives, like daggers, and like one of them has like it's a double-edged.
Do you have any double-edged knives in the room with you? No pressure.
Not in the room, but in a box in my bedroom somewhere.
Travel has been really important to you over the years and is often a part of work, and you miss it. If you could time travel, do you know where you would want to go? Like the past or the future, specific place?
Oh my gosh, past, future. Now we're going into like XYZ, like
you can go anywhere. Yeah.
World War II would be a really fun time if, I guess, between like the 40s and the 60s are a really cool time period for me. It's like one of my favorite to design for, at least. So just to sort of see that live would be cool, but it depends who I was, you know. I wouldn't want to be at the lower end of the economic scale.
Well, since we're time traveling, you can be anybody you want and you can go anywhere you want. It's kind of great like that. And this past year has kind of felt like that, like going, even just traveling to the next state has seemed impossible. Right. So why not time travel? In terms of, you know, we're imagining right now.
Well, right now I would time travel back to the powder day back in January when I was at Wolf Creek and there were like 18 fresh inches. That's what I can think of at the top of my head. But
super valid.
That's actually a very hard question to answer.
I mean, the powder day in January, like that makes sense to me as a fellow snowboarder.
Powder hound.
Yeah, powder hound, all that. So, yeah. So okay. So how about just in terms of in the near future, when you can travel anywhere in the world in the current time, is there and money is not a factor, just if.
Yeah, no, I already know what my next travel is gonna be. I was supposed to go for New Year's 2020, which was right before the pandemic happened. So it was feasible travel wise. I didn't think it was going to become such a thing at the time, but I was planning on going first to New Zealand. They have this festival. New Zealand's the first country to see the sunrise. And so they have, I forget the name of the festival. I want to say, I can't remember the name of the festival, but it's this like 4-day festival during the week of New Year's, like during New Year's. And it's a music festival and it's just all kinds of music. They party from, you know, dawn till dusk. It's a really great experience from what I've seen and researched. I was supposed to go there 2020. The only reason I didn't is because I was working at the time and I was supposed to be finished in November. The show I was on got pushed like basically a month. So we didn't get finished till December. And at that point I only had like a week to prepare. And I was also moving out of my apartment in New York. So nothing worked out time-wise to be able to make it there for New Year's. But after New Zealand, I was going to go to Australia, you know, spend a week in New Zealand or 4 days and then go to Australia, spend a few days there and then go to southern like Asia and, you know, go to Thailand and Seoul and like, you know, just sort of backpack. I love backpacking. It's one of my favorite things. And I'm very kind of bougie and I overpack for everything. But when I'm traveling, I literally pack 2 weeks. Like I have a backpack like on my back that's carry-on only. So it's not much bigger than like, okay, if we're fitting it in the screen, it's a little bigger than that, but not much. So I totally forget about myself and my things that I think I need when I travel, and I just sort of let go, and I just want to like experience as much as I can. So that's what I was gonna do, and I didn't do it in 2020. So I'm hoping for 2022, because I didn't do it for 2021 either. But I'm hoping for 2022 I'll be in New Zealand, and I'll leave probably like 2 days after Christmas. I'll spend Christmas here and then get there by New Year's and then be in New Zealand and figure it out from there. Like the beautiful thing about the film industry is you have a few days, like you work, but once you're done, unless you jump onto another show, you can turn down jobs. You can say, I'm sorry, I'm not available. Or you can say, yep, I'm available. Or you can say, I'm not available, but I will be here. Can you hold off? Type of thing. Like you can work as much as you want as long as you're getting calls for the work. So that's the beautiful thing about it. Once I finish the show I'm going on to now, which will be done about October, November, I plan to not work. And I'm going to take off until probably February, just take a couple months off, and I just want to travel. That's what I want to do. New Zealand, Australia, South Asia, wherever that may lead me.
Right, because when you're working in the film industry, it's long days, so you're going to need a little time off. Or
oh yeah, no, I mean you do need time off, but you don't always take it. Honestly, one of the good things that has come of pandemic is learning how to balance things. For example, I was the type of person, like I would schedule my time to leave the country, but I'd be going and going and going. It wasn't like it was downtime, because when I'm traveling, I'm not trying to relax. I'm trying to do as much as I can. But I was kind of forced to relax and not do things. So the beauty of it is that I don't feel like if I'm not going on vacation, I need to go onto another job, because for me, typically I work like basically 11 months out of the year, 10 to 12 hours a day, sometimes 15, 5 to 7 days a week. And that really doesn't allow much. Like you finish your work after working 12 hours and you're like, okay, I've got like 4 hours before I have to force myself to go to bed. And that's like whatever it is, whether it's cleaning the bathroom or washing your dog or walking your dog, it's all these things that I end up actually paying people to do for me, like walk my dog or take care of them if I'm working, because I'm not usually at home. The good thing about working at home is I can take her for a walk myself. I'm like, okay, I'm going to force myself. I used to smoke cigarettes, but I quit. And so now I'm like, I'm just thinking of walking my dog as like my cigarette break that I used to take. And so now I still go out, I get the fresh air, I take her for a walk, but I'm at home and she's here. When you're at the office, you don't have that luxury. But definitely that was the good thing, that it forced me to force some downtime. So I don't want to jump from show to show. I need to allow some time in between, allow some time to travel, even if it's not travel, maybe within the state or something relaxing. I tend to I tend to make like a grid and a calendar, and it's not to dictate, it's more to guide, but I try to stick to it. And I hate to be that like regiment person, but I try to be as much as I can, which is not always the best thing. And so now like this is one of the good things that's happened, is I'm not so regimented. I'm like, all right, whatever happens.
Right. It's been a good lesson in that. I kind of said that to myself early on, is I guess I better learn to just roll with it, because I'm a Taurus, and that's not really a Taurus thing. But I thought, well, I guess I better figure that out.
Kind of bulldoze through things. Yeah,
So
no, I always get along with Tauruses.
I don't know if this is an easier or harder question based upon your film industry involvement, but recently, do you have any favorite movies or shows?
Recently, my favorite TV show, which is actually not even a TV show, it's a mini series that I've recently watched, was Queen's Gambit. Love Queen's Gambit. That's like, it's probably one of the best shows that I've seen this year, I would have to say.
That's actually been one of the most popular shows from Art and the Raw guests.
Really?
So far. Yes.
It's very good. Other shows, I love Shameless. I mean, it's very raw, very dirty, but I love the rawness of it. It's just so, the writers do well. They do well at like making things genuine because you just see how raw like people really are, and everybody's to a certain degree like that. Not to that degree, but in a sense, we all get raw at some points, and I love Shameless.
Is that
Um,
on Netflix?
it's originally a Showtime show, but it is on Netflix up to season 10. You have to go to Showtime for season 11.
Any like classic childhood favorite movies?
I would, if I was saying, if I were going to childhood,
Mm-hmm.
Clueless would be, well, and Titanic and Romeo and Juliet.
So
Those
many
would
people.
be like my childhood favorites. And of course, The Lion King and The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. It's hard to say a favorite of anything, really.
So many good movies. It's hard to pick. Have you been revisiting music from the past?
Yes. It's interesting you asked that question because I've been listening to more sappy music, if you will, like more emotional mood music. Like, okay, I always like the party scene and like the up vibe and the reggae and the this and that. But sometimes you want to hear something that's kind of sappy and girly. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're alone at home, why not? So I have this playlist. I'm always on Spotify. I have this playlist and it's called I'm Just a Girl. And because I'm just a girl, and like people think of like girls as listening to sappy music. We listen to everything, but this is why I called it that. So like it's called I'm Just a Girl, but it's got like Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and like Alanis Morissette. And I made this list a long time ago, but I never listened to it for a very long time. And I definitely found myself listening to it. I also find myself listening to more, I don't know, I guess more music I haven't heard in a long time. Like my I have a playlist called Like a Rolling Stone. It's like Bob Dylan. It's like the Doors. It's the Rolling Stones. It's like a bunch of like classic rock and just sort of getting back into the classic. For a while, you weren't hearing new music during pandemic, so you just kind of like, all right, what do I want to do here? And you would listen to what you listen to. But yeah, definitely hitting into like the more nostalgic music has definitely been a thing recently for me. Yeah.
But I do think there was something about this past year in and revisiting.
Absolutely. Well, that's like one of the most beautiful things. It really makes you reflect
Mhm.
on not just this past year, but the way things were before this year. You know, it makes you actually analyze the things you've been doing and thinking, oh, wait, what was I doing there? Why was I doing that? Why was I not thinking clearly? And why was I just bulldozing through all this stuff? And I should be thinking about it. Like, and even they could be something as simple as relationships, like, oh, friends not responding to texts because you're so busy with work. We get so stuck in this automatic reply mode. Like, you don't even have to type anything. It'll be like, oh, yeah, great, thanks.
I do feel like we were all kind of in automatic reply mode for a minute
Oh,
there.
and there's so many outlets with architecture. It's kind of where art meets engineering type of thing. It's that type of world. And so even in the art department doing set design, it's kind of the same thing where like Hollywood meets the real world type of thing, and we make it happen. So that's one very interesting thing. Like having an architectural degree gives you a lot of different shooting off points, like starting points that you can go in many different directions. And the same goes for if you wanted to do not just design. If you like, they say if you can design, like by what I mean is architectural design. They say if you can design one thing, you can design anything. So if you know how to think about the way things work, whether it even be like, you can think of a building as a website. And so if you think of it as like a physical space, and even the way I work in my program, I think of it as a physical space, because you think about this and this. And if you don't get caught up in the numbers and the weirdness of it. It all translates to something like when it comes to design, design is physical. It can be flat, it can be 2D, but the 2D is representing something that's 3D. So if you can think about it in both ways, I don't know, it's a beautiful thing. And that's one of the great things that I learned from architecture school, is like it taught me how to think in different ways and in different capacities, whether you want it to be actual architectural, dealing with codes, dealing with, you know, permitting and that type of thing, or if you want to think outside the box and, you know, do something that could never happen, you know, in this world with gravity and so forth, but you want to pretend there's no zero gravity, you know, that's one of the valuable things. I would definitely say architecture degree was one of my best assets, even in the film industry. Like it kind of gives you an upper hand, if you will, just because you think about things practically, but then it can also hinder you. But when it comes to design and art, there's no box. It's all about what you want to do. And so if you want to think about it with gravity or without gravity, you can think about it however you want. And that's the beautiful thing about art. And I love that you're doing art in the raw, because it's kind of like the essence of kind of what I'm saying is that it's raw. It's whatever you want to do. And if you can design one thing, you can design anything. And just take it where you want it to.
Making the show throughout the past year has really kept me inspired. It seems to be naturally building this little community. Thank you for being part of it.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been such a joy. I've been seeing your podcast, and I always thought they were so interesting, and I'm just glad to be part of it now. Or I don't know if that's what it's called, not a podcast, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. No, I was looking into that myself. Technically, because it has a video element, it's technically not a podcast. But I don't know. Like we said, we're kind of blowing up the box. So like, why does video make it not? I don't even know what to call it.
Who needs to label it? This has been a great experience. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining. And yeah, it's Art in the Raw. We're blowing up the box, and we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to have some parties too.
Sounds great.
Well, thank you so much. Great chatting, and have a good night.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. Mwah.
Thank you for watching Art in the Raw. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please like, comment, and subscribe. Keep the inspiration and the conversation going. Have a good night.